Hello, this is Dr. Jackalyn, and I'm with DTP Leadership Group. And this is Hot Topic, Bold Talk. And I've written something that I'm going to read a lot of it because I think what I've said is really important for you to hear. And it's also going to help me focus and provide every idea that I would like to give you today. This is the title of this podcast is 107 Days, The Woman Who Could Have Changed Everything. And it's a podcast 149. It's about reflections on Kamala Harris' vision, leadership, and the contrast with Donald Trump. You know, there are moments in history when the personal and the political collide, and moments when one woman's voice with courage and resilience stands out as a mirror for the rest of us, I think. Definitely for me. When I was reading Kamala Harris's 107 days, or 107 days as correctly pronounced, was one of those moments. As I turned the pages, I felt the urgency, the heartbreak, and the vision of a leader who stood ready to serve, yet was forced to compress a lifetime of preparation into 107 days of relentless campaigning. Now, the number 107 days has now become more than a title. It is a symbol. It represents the fragile, fleeting window of opportunity in our democracy. Either rises to its best self or collapses into chaos, which we're living in now. It reminds me that the leadership isn't always about winning. Sometimes it's about standing tall long enough for others to see what dignity really looks like under pressure. And that's what she did. When Kamala Harris wrote this book, she wasn't just documenting a campaign. She was documenting the weight of a promise and the documentation of that promise to herself, to her mother's memory, and to the millions of Americans who saw in her the possibility of a new kind of leadership, one grounded in empathy and intellect and a fierce belief in social justice. I want to talk to you about this book because it's not just a political memoir. It's a wake-up call. It's an invitation to look closely at who we are becoming a nation and to compare the vision with the harsh, chaotic, and morally bankrupt and corrupt example being modeled by Donald Trump. Yesterday's election results, which is for you, it'll be a week later when you hear this, but the election results on November 4th, the small but significant wins by Democrats across the several states are not just numbers. They are signals. They show that Americans are not asleep. Beneath the noise, beneath the polling chatter, and the media spin, there is a deep current of unease. People are unhappy, not just with inflation or policy, but with the character that's being exhibited in our country, with the tone, with the feeling that the highest office in our land has become a platform for division rather than leadership. Kamala Harris's 107 days is very special in the many ways that she's talked about what happened to her. November 4th is not just about numbers. It's a signal to all of us. Beneath the noise, beneath the polling chatter and the media spin, there is a deep current of unease. People are unhappy, as I've said. It's not just with inflation and all the things, it's with who we have as president and what he is doing. Now, Kamala Harris's 107 days gives us a chance to remember what leadership grounded in humility looks like. It's not about perfection, it's about persistence. It's all about telling the truth, even though it hurts, and about refusing to reduce politics to a performance, which we're seeing in Trump. Who is Kamala Harris, and why does it matter? Why does she matter? Before diving into this book, it's worth remembering who Kamala Harris really is, beyond headlines and talking points. She's the daughter of two immigrants, a mother from India and a father from Jamaica. She grew up in the civil rights movement, carried these lessons into law school, and began her career not just chasing fame, but by chasing justice. As a district attorney of San Francisco, a California attorney general, a U.S. senator, and late as vice president, she has consistently carried one theme through her work: that law and leadership are tools for protecting people who have been ignored or harmed by the systems of power. Her philosophy, often called progressive pragmatism, blends reform with accountability. It's not radical, it's deeply moral. Yet too often, the moral clarity was drowned out by the media's caricatures, online hostility, and the impossible tightrope she had to walk as a woman of color in a national political campaign. Her book doesn't shy away from that reality. It lays bare the pain of consistently being judged for her tone, her smile, her ambition, but it also reclaims that narrative, showing us a woman who never stopped believing that our country was worth fighting for. That's why 107 days is so powerful. It is not a campaign diary. It is a declaration of faith. Harris writes with urgency, often describing sleepless nights, chaotic days, and exhaustion of being both the candidate and the symbol. But through it all, she holds on to something that many leaders have lost, and that is humility. She doesn't pretend to have all the answers. She admits where her team stumbled, where her strategy failed, and where her fear crept in. And that vulnerability, to me, is exactly what makes the contrast with Donald Trump. It's so stark, it's outrageous. Because Trump never admits failure. He turns every misstep into a weapon, every truth into a target, and every critic into an enemy. Harris, on the other hand, invites reflection, not rage. Now, the book begins in a moment of chaos. President Joe Biden's sudden decision to withdraw from the race, in Harris's own word, it was like the floor dropped out from under the party. And she had just over 3 months to rebuild every message, staff, strategy, or national trust. The book also is very clear. She writes about those days with the urgency of someone climbing a cliff with no rope. One morning, she's vice president. By the afternoon, she's the Democratic nominee for president, a role that carried both history and heartbreak. Harris became the first Black woman and the first person of South Asian descent to lead a major party ticket, and yet she knew that history alone would not save her. Her team had to raise money, unify factions, and convince skeptical voters that she could win. Every speech, every interview, every photograph carried the weight of centuries of exclusion. And through it all, she faced an opponent whose strategy was chaos itself. Donald Trump's campaign fed on misinformation, resentment, and fear. Hers reflection on this period is that there was brutal honesty about the period that she went through. She describes moments where exhaustion overtook her hope and moments when hope broke through in many interesting ways. A young girl's letter handed to her at a rally. A small town teacher thanking her for speaking about reproductive rights, and an elderly veteran telling her, "We're still with you, Madam President." These are the moments that define leadership, not the sound bites, but the human connections that keep a candidate grounded. One of the most striking things in 107 days, 107 days, is how clearly Harris outlines her vision, not in policy bullet points, but in how she lives principles. She talks about protecting democracy not as an abstract ideal, but as a daily act of courage. She reminds readers that leadership is service. It is not a spectacle with what Trump is doing. That's his view of it. It's a spectacle all the time with him. In contrast, Trump's leadership has been a performance, a relentless pursuit of loyalty over integrity, of a show, or like a spectacle over substance. Harris writes that she never wanted to lead by fear. She wanted to lead by trust, and that she argues the only substantial way forward is for us to learn to trust and work with each other. She envisioned a presidency focused on rebuilding faith in institutions, protecting reproductive freedom, addressing climate change, and restoring America's credibility abroad. Her vision of strength was not shouting loud, it was listening better. And perhaps the most powerful part of this book is her insistence that the love of country means loving its people, all its people. That's what her campaign represents. That's what her leadership still symbolizes. When you finish Kamala Harris's 107 days, you can work and get yourself some ideas about what you need to do to really create a foundation for our democracy. But more importantly, there's an important question I have for you. What would America look like today if she had won? What would America look like today if she had won? The book doesn't wallow in that question, but it echoes beneath every page. Harris's leadership philosophy, rooted in integrity, empathy, and disciplined action, stands in such dramatic contrast to the style of Donald Trump that the difference feels almost like a clash of civilizations. One offers the humility of service, the other the arrogance of self-worship. Harris describes leadership as listening to the people who are most often silenced. She writes about late-night calls with nurses during the pandemic, about listening to teachers describe crumbling classrooms, and about sitting with families who lost children to gun violence. Her sense of purpose emerges from those human moments, not from rallies or slogans. She sees government as a covenant of trust, something sacred that must not be broken. Trump, on the other hand, has turned leadership into a spectacle. Every crisis becomes an opportunity for self-promotion. Every disagreement becomes a battlefield. His governance has been fueled by grievance, not grace. Where Harris emphasizes we, Trump emphasizes me. The contrast isn't abstract, it's visibly present in policy and tone and moral compass. So I want to look more into that and show you some things. I want to look at the democracy versus the demagoguery that we're seeing. In 107 days, Harris writes about democracy as something fragile, a living organism that must be tended daily. She believes in transparency, truth, and accountability. She quotes her mother saying, "You may be the first to do something, but make sure you are not the last." That statement captures her view of power. It's not meant to be hoarded. It's meant to open doors for other people. Trump's approach is inverse. He uses power as a weapon, not a responsibility. His rhetoric toward journalists, judges, and even his own party members reflects a deep contempt for the democratic process. While Harris defends the idea that no one is above the law, Trump campaigns on the idea that he is the law. Harris's campaign, short as it was, focused on restoring the dignity of American democracy. She spoke of voting rights, of protecting access to the ballot, of ensuring the truth mattered again in our public life. Trump continues to undermine the legitimacy of elections, feeding disinformation that corrupts civic trust. That's the contrast. One believes in rules, the other believes in ruling the way he wants to. Harris's background as a prosecutor taught her that justice without compassion becomes cruelty. In the book, she tells the story of a young woman she prosecuted early in her career, who reminded her that the people we serve are not case numbers, they are stories. That insight shaped her later politics. She fought for re-entry programs, alternatives to incarceration, and reform in policing. Trump's record on justice tells another story. Under his leadership, we saw policies that dehumanized migrants, weakened civil rights protections, and placed loyalty above law in the Department of Justice. His pardon list became a who's who of personal allies rather than a reflection of mercy and fairness. For Harris sees justice as healing. Trump uses it for punishment. She asks, how can we make the system work for at least those of the least powerful? How can we make the system work for the least powerful? He asks, how can the system protect me? The contrast is moral at its core, a battle between empathy and entitlement. Let's look at women's rights and the future of freedom. In 107 days, Harris doesn't hide her outrage at the overturning of Roe versus Wade. She calls it a betrayal of half the nation, arguing that the right to control one's own body is the foundation of freedom. She connects reproductive rights to economic rights, to family stability, and to the broader fabric of equality. Trump, by contrast, celebrates the court that dismantled those rights. His Supreme Court appointments ensured that women's choice would once again become political battlegrounds. Harris's voice in this debate is not just political, it's deeply personal. She speaks as a woman, a stepmother, a citizen who believes the government has no place in such intimate discussion. When she writes about meeting women in states where abortion bans left them powerless to make medical choices, her empathy lifts off the page. She sees these women as individuals, not symbols of something. She feels their fear and vows that silence is complicity. Her vision of leadership is one where women are seen, heard, and trusted, that stands in direct opposition to the culture of contempt that Trump has normalized. Let's look at truth and accountability. Harris's book often returns to one theme. Truth is not negotiable. She admits to the mistakes. She critiques her own messaging, acknowledges when her staff faltered, and writes candidly about the moments when she doubted herself. The honesty is rare in politics, and it's what gives the memoir its power. Trump's style, on the other hand, is built on denial. Lies are currency. Accountability is weakness. The more he denies, the more his followers believe. In 107 days, Harris worries that America has entered an era where lying feels safer than leading. She calls on citizens to reclaim truth as an act of patriotism. It's that moral courage, the willingness to tell hard truths, that make Harris not just a political figure, but a teacher for our times. There's a difference in their leadership. Harris is a leadership by love versus a leadership by fear by Trump. At its heart, 107 Days is a love story, not a romantic love, but a love of country. Harris's faith in America is tested but not unbroken. She believes that love is strength, that unity is not naive, but a strategy. Trump, conversely, rules through fear. He tells supporters to distrust everyone else, to hate those who disagree. His movement thrives on anger. Harris's movement, short-lived as it was, thrived on hope. This is the soul of the difference between them. Trump's America says, only I can fix it. Harris's America says, together we can heal it. As I read the 107 Days, I couldn't help but feel the ache of what might have been. What would our nation look like if her message had taken root? If her leadership had been given the time to blossom rather than the countdown clock of 107 days? She envisioned an America that rebuilt trust, an America that invested in teachers and nurses, not tax shelters and sound bites. An America where the word justice wasn't partisan, but patriotic. In the book's final chapters, Harris writes about the election night and the silence of defeat, the tears of exhaustion, the staff's packing up the office. But even in loss, she refuses despair. She says, we didn't lose faith. We proved that faith could survive anything, even disappointment. That sentence is more than what it says. It is a sermon to all of us. We cannot lose faith. We prove that faith can survive anything, and whether we're disappointed or not, we need to stand firm about our democracy. I think it's a challenge to every American who has ever felt powerless. Harris's story shows that leadership isn't about staying in power, it's about standing in truth, even when the light goes out. There's also a warning woven into her words, a quiet fear that democracy's guardrails are eroding. She writes about threats to election workers, about online hate, of the rising tide of political violence. She calls on us to pay attention before outrage becomes apathy and apathy becomes surrender. Trump's ongoing rhetoric, attacking judges, mocking the press, demonizing immigrants, amplifies his fear. His version of America isn't about freedom, it's about domination. It's about turning citizens against citizens, making cruelty a form of governance. It's almost like it's a cruelty form of entertainment for him. Now, if 107 days is Harris's love letter to democracy, Trump's actions are the divorce papers from democracy. That's why this book matters now more than ever. It's not nostalgia, it's instructional. It teaches us how to reclaim civility, how to listen again, how to believe that politics can still be honorable. Harris insists that democracy is not a spectator sport. You don't protect the house by watching the fire, she writes. Each citizen has a role to vote, to speak, to stand up when it's uncomfortable. That's the emotional call this podcast should deliver to you. Because the difference between Harris's America and Trump's America isn't just about policy, it's about identity. Who do we want to be as people? Are we builders or breakers? Are we truth tellers or followers of convenience and lying about it in a situation? They long for stability and decency, and I think that's what's happening in America. Harris's voice echoes through her book, reminds us that these qualities aren't weakness. Stability, decency, and competence are not weaknesses. They are powerful for us to have. They are the backbone of any civilization. As we close, I want to speak directly to you as my listeners, to each of you who still believe in the possibility of something better. Read her book, 107 Days, because it's not about politics. It's about courage. Read it to remember what grace under fire looks like. Read it to feel what moral leadership sounds like when the microphone's off and the exhaustion is real. Then look around. Look at the state of our discord. Look at how truth has been twisted into entertainment, how empathy has been mocked as weakness, and ask yourself, is this the best we can do? Kamala Harris didn't write this book to settle scores. She wrote it to leave a record of integrity, of struggle, and of hope. It is her testimony that leadership rooted in decency still matters. We too have a testimony to write. Every act of kindness we do, every fact defended against the lies, every conversation that bridges differences, these are the pages of what I believe America is all about. And when I think about Harris standing on those stages, smiling through exhaustion, speaking with many millions who weren't already ready to listen, some of them interrupted her at the rallies, I see not a politician, but a teacher. Her lesson is simple. Democracy only dies when we stop showing up. Trump's legacy, by contrast, teaches us what happens when power becomes addiction. When the leader's ego eclipses the people's needs. His America is loud but empty, angry but afraid. Harris's America is quieter but braver, humble but unbreakable. And so as we reflect on these 107 days, these brief, brilliant days of hope, let us not mourn what we could have had. Let us become what we should have been. Let us read her story not as an ending, but as a beginning. A call to rebuild, to re-elect, to reignite compassion. Let us prove that truth still matters, that justice is not outdated. The love of country can coexist with love of humanity. Because if Harris's campaign lasted only 107 days, our fight for decency must last a lifetime. I want to close with these statements. As I record this, I'm healing from broken ribs and small fracture one near the spinal column. Thank God the spinal column wasn't affected. So that's the reason you probably feel different with me through this. But my body is reminding me how fragile we all are. Pain also teaches resilience. It slows down just long enough to feel what matters. Maybe that's the lesson of 107 days to us. We fall, we hurt, we breathe, and then we rise. Kamala Harris rose through defeat with dignity. We can rise too, as citizens, as neighbors, as a nation that refuses to give up on itself. So go forth, my friends. Read her book. Discuss it. Let it stir you. Let it make you angry about injustice and hopeful about change. Let it remind you that democracy isn't something we inherit. It's something we build every day, even when it feels broken. Kamala Harris's 107 days may be a memoir, but it is also a mirror. When we look into it, we see that America we could still become. And that vision, I think, is worth fighting for. Thank you for listening to me. I thought this message was so important. I found a way to be committed to give you this message, even though I have broken ribs. But I believe in standing on justice. And when I wrote it, I thought I need to give this podcast. I hope you see it as valuable, and I will be happy to hear from any of you if you would like to communicate with me.